Hello there, friends. It's Nick, and I'm going to give you an example of an origin story. And this is my origin story. It's the story that begins in 2002. And 2002 was about the only time in my life that I've ever really, really struggled to sleep. And I would wake up at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and I would lie there in the darkness and I would feel that weight pressing down on me, that real sort of sense of stress. I would feel that pressure, and it wasn't like suffocating. It was like drowning. It was that sort of big. And the reason was that my business was, steadily going bankrupt. And when I was laying there, I had my wife next to me. I had my baby in the next room. And we were living in the house that had a mortgage on it. And sometimes I would get back to sleep at 3 or 4 or 5 a.m. to wake up at 6 to go back into work to sort of sit there and wonder what had happened, because it hadn't always been that way. In the mid-90s, I worked at IBM. I was a producer and then a kind of consultant at their new media lab, which was CD-ROMs in those days and websites. So we were right at the vanguard of this content revolution that was happening in the early 90s. And when I came out of that business, I left IBM in 97, which is a whole different story. I left that business and I really walked into work. I walked into clients as a consultant, part-time consultant, and I was working a couple of days a week and making more than I'd ever made in my life. And I was doing strategy. I was doing the thinking, the 10-point plans, the proposals, the pitches, the 60-page strategy documents. I was doing all of that stuff. And, that was very well-paid work. We're talking about the dot-com boom, the ramp up to the dot-com boom. And if you knew your stuff and you could think and articulate strategy, you could be very well paid. In fact, one week or one fortnight, I earned £30,000, which was just like amazing. And it allowed me ultimately to, to buy the engagement ring, to pay for the wedding, to put down the deposit on the house, to do all those sorts of things. And in some ways, it really was quite a magical time. And what happened essentially is that I saw another opportunity, because the clients were saying, we really love the strategy and the thinking. What we need is help with delivery. And I was really lucky. I had a good friend who'd worked with me on a couple of little projects, but he was great at the design. He was great at the building, and he came into the business full time. And suddenly we were a website developer at a time when everyone wanted a website, right? And it was easy. The phone kept ringing, and the business kept coming in, and we did great work. So we had happy clients. The only thing I would say about it is that in those days, you didn't have the monthly retainer model that web development companies would have now. There was no SEO, there was no website optimization, there was none of that kind of thing. If you built a good website, it would last at least a year, and some of them were lasting 3 or 4 years, which made it quite hard to plan. And nevertheless, the business was going really well, and I enjoyed, when I went out and my wife and I went out to meet, our friends or our families. I had this, I'd gotten this reputation of being the guy who made the jump, who did the brave thing and left, corporate life and started a business and was doing really, really well. And I have to say that, I love that. I love that. I love that myth, right? Because it was a myth. Because in the early 2000s, I remember the March day when the Nasdaq reached its peak and started its long, slow decline. Well, sometimes not so slow, actually. And, the boom turned into a crash. The bottom dropped out of the market. And I would have people say to me, is this going to affect you? And I would say, no, we're fine. We've got work lined up. And I could see the crash as sort of like a storm front on the horizon. And And was it coming nearer? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I would put on the brave face and say, no, we're going to be fine. And I would tell my wife, we're going to be fine, and my family, we're going to be fine, and what have you. But actually, over the next couple of years, the work, did really start to slow down. And I can really remember vividly the first month where the money coming in didn't equal the money going out. And you think, that's not good. And then it happens the next month, and the month after that, and the month after that, and suddenly you're a snowball. You're rolling down a hill. And I was, relatively quickly, I got to the stage where I was starting to skip paychecks, and we were starting to take jobs on that we wouldn't have taken on, try and keep things going, and eventually I went to my wife and said, I think summer's always difficult for work. We're going to need some cash, some sort of liquidity, and I'm going to go to the bank and get a loan. And she, being the lovely, supportive wife that she is, says, okay, I understand. I said, the only thing is you're going to have to sign the loan as well, because we have to personally guarantee it. So we have to say we'll pay it back, which, ultimately could mean, the house. And she did it anyway, and we borrowed some money, and then that money ran out too. And I think I did it because I didn't want that myth to dissipate. I didn't want all that smoke and mirror stuff to go. I wanted to believe that I could get through. But the truth was, I had no game. I mean, this was the brutal truth. When I was doing those sums in my little notebook, saying money in, money out, and what have you, the math was brutal, and the reality was pretty brutal too. I didn't know how to sell. I didn't know how to sell us. I was terrified of the idea of making a cold call, and I didn't want to run a business that way, and the consequence of that was paralysis. We sat in the office and did no work while the money ran out, and I can really vividly remember going to a family gathering and one of my wife's cousins making some comment about the economy and saying it's so good that you really know what you're doing. It's so good that your business is so successful. And I smiled and I nodded, and inside I was sort of dying, because I knew what I knew where the graph was going, and yeah, I mean, anyway, in the end, I'd said to my mate, I think at the end of this month, we're going to have to call it quits. I'm going to have to go and try and get a job to dig myself out of this hole. And it was no surprise to him, because we hadn't been doing any work, really. And about 2 weeks before we got to the end of the month, halfway through the month, it was in the summer in 2002, the phone actually did ring, and the voice on the other end was a guy who we worked with before. He was part of an ad agency in London, and he said, listen, I've got this client. She's I've talked to her about you, and she's looking for a new website, and are you interested? Do you want to meet? And I was like, shall I come up this afternoon? And it wasn't that day, but I think it was like the next day that I went up to London to meet this lady. And, I didn't have time to do the 10-point plan or the 60-page, proposal. I just went up and met her in this, I can remember, it was this really, really tiny room. And we spoke for about an hour, and I talked about the work we did in our experience, and she talked about what she needed. And at the end of it, I said, so what do you need from us? You need a proposal, you need a price, what's the pitch process? Who are we competing against? And she said, no, I've heard some really good stories about you, and I just need a price so we can get on with it. And, have you ever been in that situation where the sort of the pressure lifts? Because that's what happened to me in that chair. I could feel it as a physical thing, that weight that had been resting on me. Even that night, when you're lying awake in bed and that weight is pressing down, and I just remember that sense of kind of, and I think that simple thing that she said about, we've heard some great stories about you, it triggered something in me. It triggered an understanding that that stories do something that pitching and logic does not. And it seems like the most obvious thing in the world now. And the metaphor I like the best that I've heard since is that if I'm selling something to you and I'm pitching you, you are processing it that through a certain filter, right? And it will be to do with your sort of practicality or your cynicism or your critical facility. Do I believe this person? Whereas if I tell you a story, you process it in a different way. And the metaphor is shields up. If I'm selling to you straight, shields up, your shields are up. But if I'm telling you a story, your shields are more likely to be down, because story is really the language that we use to communicate with each other. And I wasn't completely green then. I understood about the value of word of mouth, but I think that was the first time where I really thought to myself, well, hold on, she's heard a story that has sold us as a business without me having to do any selling, without me having to pick up the phone. And that was the first time I realised that stories could be weaponised in a positive sense and sent out into the world on our behalf. And we did that job, and we did more jobs, and a couple of years later we had money in the bank and more work than we could cope with. And if you fast forward all the way through to 2018, I sold that company in 2018, and by then we had clients in the UK, we had clients in Europe, we had clients in North America, and we had clients in Asia, which is pretty good, isn't it? But it's even better when you consider that in all that time, in all those years, we'd still never made a cold call. We'd never placed an ad. We'd never had a sales team. And that was a consequence of two things. The quality of the work, we did great work, we provided great service, and the stories that came out of that work. And that's my origin story for what I'm doing now, for my consultancy, which is Stories That Mean Business. But also for this Story Hacker channel, the channel that is about teaching people like you how to tell better stories, how to tell more effective stories. And that's it. You got something out of it. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in what we're doing here, learning how to tell better stories, check out the playlist for tools and techniques, because in a lot of those tools and techniques videos, I will be referencing things that I've done in this story, this origin story, because a lot of the things that are going on in that story relate to how you can make your own stories better. So this is Nick. This is StoryHacker.tv. Thanks for watching.